Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's episode, in celebration of the newly released Rise of Skywalker, I want to revisit DICE's controversial 2017 title, Star Wars Battlefront II, and see how it stacks up now to the 2005 title of the same name by Pandemic Studios. Battlefront II has seen somewhat of a resurgence since its disappointing debut, with the controversial loot crates and pay-to-win progression being replaced with consistent high-quality updates and a growing online community. And now that some of the more iconic maps that were excluded from release have finally found their way to the game, it seems as good a time as any to see if this game can finally hold a candle to the original classic. Now, typically, the Direct Comparison series centers around comparing visuals and effects, and while I'll still be covering those aspects, the primary focus for this particular video will be on comparing the available features and gameplay mechanics, in order to properly evaluate which delivers the ultimate Star Wars battle experience. As always, for this video, both games are being played on the PC, with their graphical settings pushed to their highest values at a 1440p resolution, and any motion blur settings will be disabled to capture cleaner still images. Alright, so to kick this comparison off, let's start by talking about the visual presentation. As you can probably already guess, Pandemic's in-house Zero engine from the early 2000s stands no chance against DICE's far more advanced Frostbite 3.0. Everything from the models, lighting, and effects are vastly superior and look almost indistinguishable from the actual source material, even better in some cases. But for the sake of consistency, let's take a closer look at each individual aspect, starting with our character models. DICE's version of these character models are far more complex, with enhanced textures, more polygons, and more fluid animation design. The advantages of today's more advanced hardware allow for finer detail along each unit's armor plating, with clearly visible scratches, dirt, and grime. The enhanced lighting also greatly helps with the presentation of the more reflective models, especially the Super Battle Droids, that now appear properly with a brushed steel appearance, as opposed to the overly shiny chrome from before. The Droidicas are even more impressive, with tons of small details never before visible in-game, including new red LED sensors near the headpiece. The increased poly count also helps to bring out the cheap plastic look in the Stormtrooper's armor, with less sharp lines and a smooth, rounded top to the helmet. Additionally, DICE's version of these characters also comes with a large amount of customizable skins to choose between, letting players pick their favorite style clone trooper or hero rather than having to rely on predetermined skins like in the original. Environments have seen similar improvements. While both games take inspiration from the films, the far more advanced technology used to build DICE's game more accurately portrays these iconic locations. Vehicle hangars that were previously empty are now filled with tons of debris and abandoned vehicles. The thick forests of Endor that were once barren and disappointing are now filled with dynamic vegetation, babbling brooks, and more texture variety. And the wild jungles of Felucia are even more impressive than before, with plenty of alien plant life flooding the screen, making it one of the more technically impressive locations in the game. The original Battlefront simply can't compete here, but does manage to include plenty of fun Easter eggs throughout each of its environments, including a living rancor that can pick up the player and eat them if they get too close. Something about Pandemic's environments feel more interesting to explore, with fun secret traps to use against your enemies, like bridges in the Death Star that can be destroyed, or the trash compactor that serves as a shortcut into this large shield generator room. There's still some fun Easter eggs in DICE's recreations, but the focus seems to be primarily on the gameplay experience, as opposed to fan service. Then of course, we have the lighting effects, possibly one of the most noticeable improvements to the latest game. Lighting effects are much more realistic in DICE's title, with proper global illumination, some HDR effects, and more advanced God Ray implementation. Though the original Battlefront 2 still offers some pretty nice effects all things considered, including some decent reflective surfaces created using mirrored assets hidden underground. This type of replication method does a great job, though with the more advanced assets and effects in newer games, attempting this now would put an unnecessary amount of strain on the hardware, so screen space reflections are used instead. It's also worth pointing out the impact blaster particles have on the environment, especially in darker locations like Naboo, where each projectile reflects colored light dependent on the type of weapon fired. It looks impressive, especially when the AI count is bumped up as high as possible, and isn't quite as noticeable in the newer Battlefront games. Though the lightsabers do a much better job lighting up the environment than ever before. Shadow quality has also been improved a great deal, with soft edges and proper diffusion relative to the amount of direct light. The original game's shadows are incredibly simplistic, basically casting a hard silhouette of the character on the ground next to them. The newer Battlefront II also benefits greatly in the effects department. Explosions, fire, and smoke are all far more impressive, with high-resolution fireballs, screen shake, and lighting working in tandem to create more convincing explosive action. Other enhanced effects include ragdoll physics, more debris from destroyed vehicles, superior particle effects, and improved water simulation. Though it is worth mentioning that the old game's water effects, while not dynamic in any way, hold up nicely for their age. Overall, DICE's Battlefront II is visually superior in every possible way. But considering DICE's track record and over 12 years of graphical evolution, this should come as no surprise. The real question here is whether DICE's Battlefront 2 plays better than its 2005 counterpart. To answer this, let's first start by taking a look at the available game modes offered in both titles, starting with the campaign. The campaign in the original Battlefront 2 was designed to allow players to take part in the infamous Order 66, where Palpatine orders the clone soldiers to betray the Jedi Order. Players assume the role of various soldiers in the 501st, and are given a brief cutscene prior to each mission describing how the clone troopers felt about the shift in their allegiances. To help frame these events, the campaign makes use of several repurposed multiplayer levels and drops in some very basic objectives, often involving destroying shield generators, knocking out turrets, and eliminating key targets. It's not the most impressive campaign experience, though it does offer a few unique mission parameters that aren't available elsewhere in the game, like fighting in space over Coruscant or wiping out the remaining Jedi at the Temple. Meanwhile, DICE's Battlefront 2 takes a completely different approach. The campaign in 2017's BF2 tells a brand new story about an elite squad of stormtroopers soon after the events of Episode 6, and follows Eden Versio through a number of completely new scenarios. This campaign revolves much more heavily around its narrative, with unique characters, mid-mission cutscenes, new environments, and special gameplay mechanics. Neither campaign is really that memorable, though I do feel as though following the 501st throughout the course of Revenge of the Sith and into Empire Strikes Back provides players with more opportunities to relive some of the most epic moments in the saga, something that is at the core of what makes the Star Wars Battlefront series so interesting. The story in DICE's BF2 is certainly interesting, and is even canon to the Star Wars timeline, but seems to steer clear of trying to recreate classic Star Wars battles, opting instead for a brand new story experience. Outside of the campaign, both games offer a large variety of game modes, allowing players to fine-tune their experience and set up their ultimate Star Wars fantasy. In Pandemic's Battlefront 2, this comes in the form of Instant Action. Instant Action allows players to set up their own custom playlists, with every multiplayer map available to choose from, along with options to select between either the prequel or original trilogy assets, specific objective types, and even options to tweak various settings like AI count, difficulty, hero parameters, and win criteria. Objectives range from standard conquest and capture the flag, to the fan-favorite Space Assault, that sees players boarding starfighters and attempting to destroy the enemy's capital ship, either by dealing significant damage to the exterior or sneaking on board and destroying the ship from the inside out. The original Battlefront 2 also features a unique XL mode for 3 of the largest ground war maps, allowing for truly epic all-out warfare with hundreds of AI units on the field. The Instant Action playlist menu greatly simplifies the overwhelming amount of content available in the game, and functions identically to the online multiplayer menus when creating a server. Outside of Instant Action, players can also participate in the beloved Galactic Conquest. That sets up a sort of board game scenario where players can move around capital ships on a large galaxy map, and attempt to liberate hostile-controlled planets by engaging in both space and ground combat scenarios. Upon completing battles, players are rewarded with points to move their ships to attack more planets, and can also purchase additional upgrades to make future battles easier, like new unit types and one-time use bonuses like increased damage or hero support. DICE's Battlefront 2, however, does not currently feature any mode like this, and complicates things quite a bit when it comes to its instant action and multiplayer content. Instant Action is somewhat like the old Battlefront 2 in that it lets you set up your own major battles with slight modifiers, but the menu is severely limited, with only a handful of maps to choose from, and no way to change the era on a per-map basis. The only available objective in this version of Instant Action is Capital Supremacy, which functions similarly to the standard conquest from the original games. Arcade, on the other hand, does feature a larger selection of maps, including some aerial combat scenarios, but only the smaller-scale deathmatch-oriented versions of them. Levels like Kashyyyk, for example, are limited to the treetop structures, with no large-scale ground assault on the beaches. Players can tweak several settings, and can even set it up so that only heroes are available to choose from, similar to the bonus assault option from Mos Eisley in Pandemic's version. But overall, the arcade mode fails to capture the large-scale conflict of battles in the older games, forcing players to instead experience the more impressive set pieces in populated online matches. DICE's Battlefront II also includes both a tutorial playlist and a challenge mode to play, though again, these are mostly just small-scale engagements. Battlefront II 2017's multiplayer is where the game really gets a chance to shine. Unlike Pandemic's Battlefront II, DICE's version offers full player progression and significantly more variety, with playlists and modes that will appeal to a broader audience. The first set of available modes are called Hero and Villains, that offer players a chance to duel with their favorite characters from the series. As I mentioned before, Pandemic's Battlefront II offers a similar mode, though it's limited to Mos Eisley only. DICE's Battlefront II also includes a unique Hero Starfighter mode that lets players fly iconic vehicles like the Millennium Falcon and Slave One, vehicles that were never made available to fly in the old games. The second set of multiplayer modes are called Assault. These are the classic, large-scale conflicts often used to advertise the game. Players can participate in iconic battles, including the invasion of Naboo and the Battle for Kashyyyk, with objective-based matches with up to 40 players online. Capital Supremacy is also included in the Assault mode category, and introduces multi-phase conflicts, requiring players to take control of ground points, and then launch an attack on the enemy's capital ship. This mode bears a heavy resemblance to DICE's old Battlefield 2142, though the capital ship sequences require a transitionary loading screen, rather than just being implemented directly into the same map together. DICE's Battlefront II also offers Starfighter Assault, offering a similar experience to Pandemic's Space Assault maps. Unfortunately, players are not able to disembark from their craft and sabotage enemy ships on foot, but the actual aerial objectives are more involved than they ever were before, which helps to focus the experience a little bit more. The rest of the modes available in multiplayer are more simple, small-scale, team-oriented modes typical of modern-day multiplayer shooters, including escort objectives, TDM, and a variation of Pandemic's Hunt mode that lets players hunt down Ewoks in the woods. Outside of the competitive modes, there's also the new Co-op mode, allowing players to work together to defeat enemies on levels similar to the old cooperative options in Pandemic's game. Now, let's talk about the actual combat and maneuverability. This is where DICE's game has the upper hand. The original Battlefront II hasn't aged very well in terms of its gameplay design. Movement is stiff and clunky, and combat is often repetitive and unsatisfying. However, there are some interesting changes that have been made that fans will likely still be divided on. One in particular is the design of the ammunition for weapons. In the original Battlefront II, blasters have finite ammunition that needs to be reloaded after 50 or so shots. Ammunition can be replenished from nearby gonk droids or from dropped red containers from defeated enemies. Health functions similarly in that there's a distinct health bar in the corner of the screen that can be replenished by medical droids or blue containers. DICE's Battlefront II, however, does not have any ammunition or health pickups. Weapons instead function on cooldowns and need to be cooled if fired for too long. Health is handled with a standard health regen design that requires that the player only hide around a corner to restore their status back to normal. The weapons themselves are balanced much better in the newer game. In the old Battlefront II, assault troopers can one-shot players easily with their rocket launcher and spam mines in narrow hallways, effectively blocking attacks on objectives. But the newer Battlefront has enough tools and gadgets available to all units to easily counteract any powerful abilities. There's still things that can be adjusted, but it feels like a much more cohesive multiplayer experience this time around. Classes in the original game were Standard Infantry, the Assault Trooper, Sniper, and Engineer, and players could additionally unlock special units like the Jet Troopers, Droidekas, and Imperial Officers. All of these classes are equipped with standard cosmetics based on the map, and predefined loadouts, with no way to customize them further. The new Battlefront II, however, offers significantly more customization, with several weapons, perks, and cosmetics to unlock, now free from the invasive loot crates that plagued the game's release. Classes in the newer game include Assault, Heavy, Officer, and Specialist, and just like the original version, players can unlock special units by acquiring points mid-match. Additionally, players can now unlock vehicles using the same point system. This removes the neutral vehicles from the field, circumventing the need to race random players to them and avoiding the issue where enemies would steal heavy armor and spawn camp with them. Heroes are also handled differently. In the original game, the default settings made it so that the player with the highest score would be given the option to assume the role of that map's specific hero or villain. The new game makes heroes into more expensive special units, and are no longer locked in their era or specific map, meaning multiple heroes from multiple eras can now fight alongside or against each other, putting an even greater focus on the hero-villain gameplay mechanic than before. The original Battlefront from 2004 didn't even have any heroes, as it was decided that it would detract too much from the core battle experience. But the later games seemed to lean very heavily into the heroes as one of the biggest selling points, as they're featured strongly in every trailer and seem to be one of the most common threats in every match. The heroes can also be customized just like the standard infantry, with unique player cards to enhance their abilities and change out their force powers, allowing players to fine-tune their experience with their favorite characters. Next, I want to briefly go over the available maps in both games, including their general layout, size, and variety. So first off, let's talk about the levels shared between games. Both games feature their own interpretation of iconic Star Wars locales, including Yavin 4, Kashyyyk, Geonosis, Kamino, Felucia, Naboo, Mos Eisley, Endor, Hoth, and the Death Star interior. But instead of recreating classic scenes from the films, DICE's vision of these locations is based more so around the aftermath of those scenes. Jabba's palace, for example, no longer features a living Jabba the Hutt. In fact, the Rancor down below is already dead, and Han Solo is freed from his carbonite slab. It's an interesting premise, though I'm not entirely sure it's necessary, as it seems to limit the scope and prevent players from truly recreating their favorite moments from the movies. Both games also feature a decent amount of unique maps as well. The original Battlefront II lets players fight at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, the swamps of Dagobah, the refinery on Mustafar, Mygeeto, Polis Massa, Utapau, and even the Tantive 4 from A New Hope. Many of these maps were designed specifically around the release of Episode 3, similar to how DICE's Battlefront II features a number of environments inspired by the new Disney-produced films, including Jakku, Starkiller Base, Takodana, Crate, and the Kessel Mines, along with a few newly released maps based around Rise of Skywalker. Overall, the total number of maps comes out to about 18 ground maps and 6 space maps in Pandemic's Battlefront 2, versus the 20 ground maps and 6 space maps in DICE's Battlefront 2. And that's not even including the unique environments created for DICE's single-player campaign. In terms of design, DICE's map design is also built with much better multiplayer lane designs, with plentiful cover, smarter objective placement, and better flanking routes. The older game is more open-ended, with large empty fields with little to no cover at all. To counter this, the old Battlefront 2 features much larger chaotic battles to participate in, with plenty of AI bots to help draw fire and get you to where you need to go. It's pretty messy from a gameplay perspective, but still impressive to look at nonetheless, and matches the over-the-top chaos of the films. DICE's version may not feature as many large-scale battles, but does offer much greater variety, with environments spanning 3 eras of Star Wars cinema. There's still a large number of battles I'd love to see added in the future, but it still offers the most content of any game in the series, albeit not as easily accessible offline. Finally, let's listen to a few sound comparisons. Which game do you think has the superior audio design?
Heads down! Weapons stored! Stay there!
And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. Overall, DICE's Battlefront 2 has managed to recover very well from its miserable debut in 2017. New additions like Felucia, Geonosis, and a number of iconic heroes have helped to bring the game more in line with the fan-favorite original Battlefront 2 from 2005. DICE's version is still fairly limited in terms of its offline content, and the battles themselves are smaller in scale, but the amount of depth and complexity has been increased considerably, with much better controls, combat mechanics, balancing, and map design. But at the same time, there's something special that can be said about Pandemic's titles. The ability to easily set up playlists with hundreds of AI bots all running around blasting each other is something that DICE's games still fail to properly capture, despite being visually superior in absolutely every way. But what do you guys think? Do you think DICE's Battlefront II holds a candle to Pandemic's version? Or would you rather boot up the old 2005 game and play that instead? Let me know in the comments section. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos posted every week.